Hello, everyone, and welcome to our online info session for LEED V4 Green Associate Exam Prep course at Ashton College. My name is Lindsay, and I'm with the Marketing Communications team. Today, I'm joined by several colleagues. We have Lily as our technical host, Maggie from admissions, and we have our instructor, Lauren. I'm excited for today as we have Lauren taking us through a presentation followed by a short Q&A. But first, I want to share a few different ways you can engage with us during this session. We love to hear any of your questions. So if you're with us on Zoom, feel free to use the chat box, Q&A box, or raise the hand function. And if you're tuning in on Facebook Live, you can leave us a comment and we'll get to it at the end. And if you're watching this video on YouTube afterwards, please feel free to leave us a comment or connect with us by emailing us at ceinfo@ashtoncollege.ca or give us a call at 604-891-1256. And hello, Lauren. Thanks for being here.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me. It's good to see everybody.
Awesome.
And yeah, everybody can see my screen all right now.
Yes, that's good.
Perfect, perfect. So whether you're watching this live or probably recorded, if you have any questions at all, by all means, you can contact anybody through the comments, as Maggie just mentioned. So I'm gonna today run through a little bit of an intro of what LEED is all about, how it's kind of pertinent to today's industries, many of them, how it can be pertinent to you and how it might help you in advance your career. And so I'm gonna start off by doing a little bit of background of why we're even here. Why does this thing called LEED exist? Why is it necessary? And I should probably also tell you a bit about myself. So my name's Lorne Mlotek. I did civil engineering at the University of Toronto a while back now, and where I focused on building science. And when I was there, I thought it was really neat to see how to make a building a lot more efficient. And I found that was kind of my passion that I wanted to pursue. And coincidentally, on my first summer internship, I worked at this company called Morris and Hirschfield, and they were building our service centers on our highways, and they were all going for LEED, which I had no idea what that meant back then. But you know, working with these projects, I saw it was kind of a way to define what makes a green building actually sustainable. You know, the public was sick and tired of everybody claiming that they had a green building just by painting it green and saying it was. How do we know it's actually good for the environment, the economy, and us in the society? And that's really the void that LEED filled as a third-party standard. So all of us can trust that when we invest or encourage someone to build in a certain way, LEED is a third-party verified green building standard. And that really piqued my interest. And then I saw you could get yourself accredited by taking an exam called the LEED Green Associate. And I thought that was a fantastic way to kind of get a head start in my career. And back then, you actually needed work experience on these LEED projects to be eligible for the exam. They don't need that anymore. So I was really lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And I had a very luxurious task on those projects. I single-handedly designed all of their RV waste stations, which you have any idea what that is. It's a hole in the ground if you're stopping with your RV to dump its waste out. Gross, but that was my claim to fame. I guess it's kind of sustainable if you think about it, but don't think about it too much. It's kind of gross. And then I took the exam. I passed back to university my second year. Nobody knew what LEED was back then. So no bragging rights. Not even my professors. A lot of them hadn't heard of it yet. So I said, darn. But a lot of my other friends, they said, look, this is where the industry is going. How can I get involved too? And often the preparation and the workshops out there are really just aimed at you know, seasoned professionals, and they're very expensive. So I just started tutoring some friends about 10 years ago. And since then, there's been a lot more demand, and I've been teaching workshops similar to what I'm doing with Ashton, starting in September, preparing people of all ages, of all different disciplines on how to become a LEED Green Associate, and eventually maybe a LEED AP if they're interested in taking the second level. So before COVID, I used to teach in about 80 cities each year. And it's a little bit different since March 2020, in which we're doing webinars now. But I'm thankful that the internet exists, and that, you know, I found a way to set it up so it's a lot more engaging with me taking up almost half your screen. I can really keep your attention a lot longer, and so it's been really beneficial. And so far, I've taught about 10,000 people, and everybody who's followed my study steps and used my materials has passed their exam. So that's a good thing, and you can too if you take this course. And that is enough of talking about me. Now, to the background, what even happened to make our Earth in such trouble that we needed a third-party standard for green buildings? Let's go back in time a bit, and we'll take a little time travel and look at some historic ways that we used to build. And here's a really cool building. If you don't recognize it, it's the Pantheon, and there's actually a lot of sustainable features in here. You know, the oculus, this open circle, is the only source of daylight for the entire space, and it reflects off this concave roof ceiling to illuminate the entire space. You know, any rain that falls is actually captured and was reused in the past, and it's very highly insulated, not much better compared to our current ways that we build a couple thousand years ahead of time. Here's a wigwam. You know, this is the definition of building with nature, you know, not fighting against its elements, but working with its elements so everybody can be comfortable without harming the environment, economy, or society. And this is something called solar heating. It's pretty simple. Building under this ridge, we're blocking the high-angled summer sun's heat that we don't want, but still maintaining the low-angled winter sun's heat from coming inside and heating us up in the winter when we need it. So what I'm trying to get at here is, you know, buildings aren't new. We've been building buildings for thousands of years. And if we could take some of the techniques that we used to build or variations of them and incorporate it in our buildings today, you know, we might be a lot more efficient than we knew we could be, just by using techniques that have worked in the past. And this is the modern way of looking at that solar or passive heating and cooling, blocking the unwanted heat from the high-angled summer sun, but giving me free heat from the low-angled winter sun when we do want it in our south-facing windows. And so really, why are we here today? I'm not going to explain too much about global warming and carbon emissions. We understand the connection. Never have we had more carbon in our atmosphere than today, and that is a result of how we power our daily lives through fossil fuels. And we know that that carbon is able to trap extra heat in our atmosphere and increase our temperature by a little too much. And it's going to have a lot of effects, and it already has had some. We're looking at not only the air warming, but also our waters are warming. And we're seeing more and more vicious hurricanes, which warm water is a breeding ground for. And you can barely calculate how much damage in terms of lives and money that things like this have caused. You know, we're looking at unprecedented levels of drought throughout Africa, and now in North America. We saw the US, a lot of their lakes are below points that have ever been seen before, and just general pollution. And to be honest, if we don't make any big changes right now, we're going down the wrong path. And there's a lot of people out there that, you know, don't believe that science. And I say to them, okay, fine. Let me frame it in a different way. Right now, we're on Earth. It's the only planet we're living on. There's a finite amount of resources on it. And we've been lucky enough that the Earth is willing to share them with us, but it simply doesn't make sense to use them at the rate we're using them. Whether you talk in a climate change sense or just a common sense, it's not economical. Look, our population is rising. Our demand for energy is only going up faster and faster. If we keep our consumption rate at this level, we're just not going to be able to afford our sources of energy. It's just not efficient, and it's short-sighted, and essentially our consumption rate is too high for our energy resources, and we need to find alternatives that are less harmful as well. So there's this word sustainability. It is the buzzword of the last decade, that's for sure. Everybody claims themselves to be sustainable, and this is one that actually is a direct sustainable profession, and I'm happy that you're interested in it. Now, there's a lot of different definitions, but the one that I like to get you in a good frame of mind is the fact that we don't inherit our Earth from our ancestors. but we rather borrow it from our children. And that plays on the actual definition of using enough of Earth's resources to support ourselves without compromising future generations to support themselves. And that's what we're here about, and mainly pertaining to buildings. Because buildings are big suckers. Oh boy, look at this. In a building, where does most of our energy go? If you don't know, it's actually heating. So in a cold climate like Canada, 50% of our energy load per year goes towards heating. Then we also have lighting and cooling, and plug loads are growing more and more as we have more technological advancements. Now, I like to get people thinking in my classes, and this is one of the ways that I do it. Looking at these two buildings, you know, we have one building in 1864, one in 2012. But from a energy efficiency standpoint, the one built 150 plus years ago is actually operating somewhat at a higher efficiency. Why? And I look at I ask you to look at the difference between them, and I see the most obvious one is what the facade is made out of. We are in this glass obsessed society right now where all we do is build floor to ceiling windows. I don't know why. I don't know why our feet need views 24/7. But that's the main difference. And no matter what glass you use, it doesn't come close to the insulating properties of a basic wall. And so that's why it's really important to think about the balance of the window to wall ratio, this being about 30% versus this being about 80%, and the impacts that it has. But there's also trade-offs, because we do want to encourage daylight and views and connections to the outdoor environments. And these are some of the thought processes that we will go through in the course. This one's a little less obvious. You know, what's the main difference between these two buildings here? And how I look at it, not much, except I see there's balconies on our left side here. And so what that indicates to me is that's a residential building versus this likely being a commercial building. And a lot of people say, you know, maybe balconies are good because they do that passive heating. They shade you a bit from the summer sun's heat. And you're right, they do. And that's a good thought process if that's where your mind took you. But in most cases, they actually have a negative effect. And the reason is we like to pour a continuous concrete slab for all of our floors. And what happens is when our cold or warm air gets conducted into our concrete slab, because it's continuous, it has a nice thermal bridge, and we lose a ton of energy through our balcony slab. And there's different ways to correct this, like having a break in that continuous slab at the balcony, but often we cut costs. So these are good things to get your mind going and thinking in the right direction. So now we've identified the problem being climate change, the problem being our consumption rate of all of our resources simply being too high, and we just need to be more efficient with the resources that we have, do more with less. And we can, and we have the technology, we have the knowledge, we just need to get to apply it more and more, and it's only growing and growing. So that's the problem. Looking at the solution is what I call, not what I call, but what everyone calls LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And as I mentioned before, it's trying to eliminate greenwashing. You know, random people just claiming their building is sustainable and green without any third-party verification to say, yep, you got my stamp of approval. Everybody can trust that it is a sustainable building now. And that's the void that LEED fills. LEED has been a very successful standard in terms of an over-standardized society that we have today. LEED has come out as the primary one for buildings. I was funnily reading an article that my friend sent to me that with all of our space age talk and our race to space with all of our lovely billionaires, they're trying to make a sustainability rating system based on LEED for space travel. I just read that yesterday, so I thought that was something interesting. But if that doesn't speak to the success of LEED so far, I don't know what does. Now, I like LEED a lot because it's legitimate. What I mean by that is we created it. You know, actual professionals who are in the industry, who have realistic expectations, don't ask for the craziest impossible, but are still much better than our building codes. And so we are still raising the bar. When you make the commitment to go green, that happens right away early in the project, which is good because normally designers might not think about how their decisions affect the overall sustainability of the building. And in LEED, we make sure everybody's thinking about it right off the bat. And most importantly, it's marketable. The US and Canadian Green Building Councils and Green Building Councils around the world have spent a lot of money on marketing LEED to the public. Frankly, if nobody knew what it was, who would care? But because the public is demanding it more and more, well, companies are answering our demand for sustainable practices. Now it's a point-based system. So there's 4 different levels of certification, and maybe you've seen these plaques on some of the newer buildings in the last 10, 15 years, wherever you're tuning in from. If you haven't noticed them, they're often on the front door or behind the concierge's desk, and you will notice them from now on, I promise. There are 4 levels of LEED, depending on how many points your building achieves, starting with certified at 40, 50, silver, gold 60, and the highest is platinum at 80. And to get there, there's 110 total points amongst a number of sustainability categories that we'll take a glimpse into. Where do those points lie? So those categories, they have mandatory requirements called prerequisites. You have to do all of those. Then there are optional credits. Once you've completed all the prerequisites, you have no points, but it's kind of like a green light to say, all right, now you can pursue the credits. And these are where we pick and choose what we want to put in our building, depending on how much they cost, how important it is to the designers and the owners, how many points you're going to get for doing the credit. It's your decision on what you want to make a LEED building out of while still hitting the targets of the rating system. And this is a little scorecard that we go into detail in the course, just breaking down all the point totals per credit per category. Now, these are the categories, and we're going to just touch on them a little bit, but I just wanted to introduce you to them because eventually they will be somewhere in your brain. And here are all the categories tallying up to 110 points total. Now, the reason why LEED has really been so successful, and you've probably heard about it before I brought it up or Ashton's brought it up to you, they've done a fantastic job showing developers and owners that going green doesn't have to mean cash money green. And a lot of the times I've seen a LEED building not cost anything more, no premium over a conventionally designed building. However, usually it's about a 1 to 3 or 4% premium on the initial cost of a building. 1 to 4, that's nothing. Well, on a $100 million building, 1 to 4 million bucks is still something to most people. And that has been a challenge on encouraging people to kind of make the jump into LEED. However, once they see the high return on the investment, it's a much easier sell. And there's 2 different ways to return your investment. The indirect ways are marketability. So we look at a lot of universities, colleges, businesses like banks, only building, buying, and leasing out LEED certified space. Why? Well, looking in 2021 and on, sustainability in our decision makings as a customer has only become more important. And if our sustainable values align, maybe I'll come to college, university with you. Maybe I'll do business with you if our environmental values align. And that's the indirect way, increasing our corporate sustainable or social responsibility. The more direct and the real seller is this simplified chart. You know, a red building at year 0 has the lowest cost, but over time we're using more energy, more water, more maintenance. It's not the best building, it's just built to code. Whereas a green building sure initially costs a little more, but over time we're less vulnerable to the fluctuations of energy, of water. You know, maybe we even have excess electricity from photovoltaics on our roof, and we can sell that electricity back to the grid and recoup even more of our investment. And if you have not seen this picture before, it's called the 3 Ps, the triple bottom line, call it whatever you want. And it's kind of the basis of sustainability. It's what we're trying to accomplish with LEED. We break the earth into these 3 big spheres. There's the profit economy, the people society, and the planet environment. And what I'm hoping our building is able to do is satisfy a lot of the wants and needs in each of these spheres through completing LEED credits to get a sustainable building in the middle. And that side that we just touched on was the profit side with our high return on our initial investment. But what about the people? As I said, we're in these buildings all day, every day. And I mentioned we are demanding green buildings more and more. And frankly, if companies don't meet what we, the market's demanding, those companies aren't doing too hot going forward. And that shift is taking place even to a generational extent. You know, you look at grade school curriculums nowadays, they all have a component of sustainability. Earth Day, Earth Hour, who knew about those 40 years ago? Now they are embedded in our current culture. And most important to us here today, it is a brand new job market. You know, we've had the blue collar workers, we've had the white collar workers. Now there's this green collar industry. I wore my wrong shirt, I'm sorry. But it's here to stay. It's growing rapidly and it's good to get involved in now. And honestly, LEED is one of the very few professional designations that opens a lot of doors that normally, you know, an unconventional background or student might not be able to access. And so LEED does a good job at bridging a lot of different industries together. And you know, that's one thing I like most about LEED and sustainability. It is so multidisciplinary. If you do not know exactly what you want to do in your life, great, fantastic. That's wonderful because LEED and sustainability get you exposed to a lot of parts of the industry. The built environment is a huge one. Look around. There's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of parts you probably didn't even know was an option as a career. And as I mentioned, that's kind of what happened to me. I just got exposed to LEED. I saw how interesting it was, how much it tied different elements that I found interesting together, and that was the choice that I pursued. But no matter what, if you think about an industry or a career that has anything to do with building a building or putting stuff inside the building or even the people in that building, LEED touches on it. So it's a huge wide variety of industries where LEED comes up in, which is good because you get exposed to it and you might find something you didn't even know was out there. And most importantly for the consumer, it is our future. So we should probably not mess things up more than we already have. And here are some cute babies there. And after all, it does start with education, and that's why we're here. And the people side, we just talked about that. And the planet side, you know, we'll talk about a lot during the course, but as we mentioned that already. Frankly, though, there's only one Earth. Let's not destroy it. Let's preserve it for at least a few more generations. I hope a lot more, by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, lowering our carbon output into our atmosphere. And we talked about that already. Now, sometimes depending on where you're at, there's actual incentives to ease the financial cost of going green. And some of the incentives, I'll give you a few examples. A structural incentive. Maybe if you build a green building in your city, the city will say, I'll let you build an extra floor that you're normally not zoned for or permitted to. And so I'm saying, wait, if I just follow a green certification or what you're telling me to do, I can build and then sell an extra floor. Well, I could potentially recoup all of my extra costs with that extra floor I can sell right off the bat. Good deal. There's some other ones that are a lot more common, and unfortunately these do come in and out depending on who's in political power, how much money your city has to offer, what the city finds important, what the province, state, country does. But different financial ones are very common, and Vancouver has one, and Toronto has one. Toronto has this thing called a Toronto Green Standard, and so essentially you have to build to Toronto Green Standard Level 1, which is above the Ontario Building Code if you want to build in Toronto, if you want to build in Vancouver. And then there's a second optional tier where if you build up to that level, you get like 25% of your permitting fees back, which was like a few $100,000 for this development that I worked on a few years ago. So it can be good money. And the thing about building it up to that tier 2, you're already above a LEED certified quality building. So it's just an absolute no-brainer to get it LEED certified and to follow the steps to do so. And that's where you need somebody like me to help you through the process. And there's also non-financial ones. You know, Build a Green Building will put you on the city's website as the greenest building in town to show off. You should know that there's LEED is not alone. There's a lot of green building rating systems out there. LEED is the primary one. It's the biggest one. It's the most common and consistently standardized across the globe. And that's actually why it's so popular. A lot of multinational companies like to keep their building programs to a high consistent level globally. And since LEED is the same no matter where you are, the exams are the same no matter where you are, multinational companies love it because it can be kept consistent. And the biggest selling point is it's realistic. It's not asking us the craziest to do, but it's significantly better than our building codes are out there. Now, here are a few, just wanted to list them off. BREEAM's a big one in the UK. You know, if you've ever seen this logo is for something called the Living Building Challenge. And that is a very cool standard. Way harder than LEED. We're talking like full net zero energy, net zero water, treat your own wastewater on site. And as I mentioned, the reason why LEED is the most popular today is because it's realistic. But you know, I'll talk about one building. I know I was going to talk, it was a question for later, but good time now. There's this building called the Kendata Center, and that's in Atlanta at Georgia Tech. And there's another living building called the Bullitt Center, which are really cool. No mechanical HVAC needed, all passively ventilated, all day, a lot of good daylighting options, and just some really nice examples of what we can do if we set our mind to it. Okay, now there's kind of two sides of LEED. What we've been talking about so far is the buildings. We've seen the buildings get certified. You've probably seen the plaque on the wall. We talked about the 4 levels of certification, but the people, you and me, we can get accredited. And so there are 3 levels of accreditation. And we're going to start by talking about the Green Associate, which is what this course is all about. And it is a 2-hour exam, 100 multiple choice questions. It has a few different fees depending on if you're a student or a professional. And it's a really unique one. There's not many professional designations at all out there that are accessible to you and that show the public, that show the workforce, you have this stamp certified knowledge in sustainability. And that's what the LEED Green Associate really shows potential employers and clients out there. And you know, it's not even just architects, engineers, manufacturers, even like banks. I've taught, for example, you know, JP Morgan's real estate analyst division. They want to know what goes into their building and their investments to make it LEED certified. And so it's really a diverse array of different people that find interest at the LEED Green Associate level. It is a prerequisite, the Green Associate that is, to the accredited professional level 2. There are no prerequisites to the Green Associate, but you've got to pass the Green Associate before going on to the AP. And there's different specialties in the AP, which we'll talk about, but quickly, I, for example, am a building design and construction for new buildings, and O+M for operations and maintenance for existing building retrofits. And those were the 2 paths that I chose to specialize in. However, most of my past students often just stop at the Green Associate. You know, sometimes it's enough for them. It's really totally up to you. They can never do harm as the way that I see it. You're going to use them sooner or later for your own benefit, but they're definitely never gonna hinder you. The fellow is just this honorary designation if you've been in the industry for 10 years to get nominated for. Now, who actually made LEED up? The US Green Building Council over 20 years ago, they're the ones that invented LEED, and they are still the ones that run the show. They created the rating system, which is how we rate what makes a green building, well, actually green. They also produce our reference guides, which are 800 wonderful pages, the Bible of LEED, telling you one step at a time how to build a LEED building. Don't worry, we don't use that for the Green Associate. Then there's this tool called LEED Online, which we submit all of our documentation and proof that we actually built it properly. So it's very unique in the sense that nobody comes on site. Everything goes through LEED Online to submit our proof, from pictures to drawings to signatures to as-built drawings, which are approved by your local regulatory body. And then the Green Business Certification Inc., they're the ones that review it. They also create our exams and decide what to test us on. So I like to think of these and remember them as the USGBC are kind of like the creators of LEED, and the GBC are out there enforcing it and making sure we built it properly. In Canada and in most countries, we have our own green building councils. In Canada, for example, we have the Canadian Green Building Council, and they do a lot of policy advocacy. They have some conferences, some seminars, and also help with the advancement of LEED in Canada. But as I mentioned, because LEED is the same everywhere, it's the US GBC's version that we're examined on and that we use as well. Now, I love to keep reminding everybody of why we're here. And one thing that people often don't think about is our population is rising pretty quickly. The only thing faster than population is our demand for energy. How are we going to keep up? There's only two ways, right? We are either going to produce more of it or use less of it. But think about it like this. For every 1 new kilowatt hour of energy our planet, our people need, it is 3 to 100 times more expensive to generate it, be it through coal, nuclear, renewables. It doesn't matter how. Rather than saying, hey, wait a second, where do we use that 1 kilowatt hour of energy? Let's reduce it. I'm saying it's 3 to 100 times cheaper to reduce where we use than it is to build up new capacity. And if financially it makes sense to reduce our use, let's go for the biggest suckers, as I said, buildings. Up to 72% of our electricity, 50% of our energy, and 38% of our carbon dioxide emissions are due to buildings. So if this is the largest fruit on the energy consumption tree, and financially it makes sense to reduce consumption first, let's do it. And that is a huge part of LEED, is how can we make buildings reduce their impact on the people and the planet? And LEED was smart. They said, why should we reinvent the wheel? There's tons of good tools and standards out there that are much smaller of a scale, but they work and they're often underused. And here's an example of one that's heavily embedded in LEED called the Lifecycle Assessment, which I'm sure y'all have heard of. You know, don't just look at one stage of the product or project. You gotta look at its entire life. How did we extract it, manufacture it, transport it, end of life, where it goes? And this gives us a much more realistic perspective on selecting and comparing products and buildings. And LEED uses them a lot. Now, different credits in LEED have different amounts of points. And I just wanted to show you a loose way of how LEED determined why one credit is worth more than another. And so, for example, the #1 thing we're trying to get from LEED is reverse our contribution to climate change through all of our activities, from buildings to transportation. And so if credit A does a better job at that than credit B, you'll probably expect to see credit A be worth more points. We're also trying to enhance the human health and well-being of our planet, protect our water, biodiversity, our other resources, a greener economy, and just generally better social equity. And these are the kind of the 7 impact categories of how LEED determined which credit to make worth how many points. And so these are things that I like to bring up a lot during the class to have people thinking about it in the back of their minds as we go one credit at a time and people are scratching their head saying, why is this one worth so much? And it's always good to have that in the back of your head. Now, we talked about the plaque on the wall. How does that plaque get there? The first step to getting LEED certified is called registration, and that means you've done nothing. It just means you're thinking about it, and that is a good first step, though you got to be thinking about it if you're going to get certified. And the person who registers the project is then deemed the project administrator, and that's usually somebody like me. That's usually a LEED or a sustainability consulting firm. Just Google this. No matter where you are going to see pages of results. Look, there's a lot of developers and a lot of owners that want to go for LEED and are only building LEED or better. And they need sustainability consultants to help them do the correct documentation and the right strategies to get there. So it is a really big business now. And I'm kind of this middleman that organizes LEED Online that tool where everybody submits the proof that we built it properly. And through LEED Online, I say, hey, owner, you know, I need your signature for credit 1, architect your drawing for 2, engineers your calculation for 3, contractors your pictures to prove 4. And once I have it all, I submit it through LEED Online to get that check mark and eventually become certified. And this is that scorecard I showed you earlier, a little list of all the available credits. So one thing I really like LEED for recognizing is that different buildings have totally different demands from a sustainable standpoint. And now we have 5 what's called rating systems to address different building types. The first one I mentioned briefly already, building design and construction, which is for new construction or major renovations. And almost 90% of all LEED buildings to date are under B, D, and C, mainly because it was the original version of LEED, but most importantly, the easiest thing to build green is a new building because you have a clean slate. And so that's why it's been the most common. And within the B, D, and C umbrella, there's 8 what's called market adaptations around us. So for example, the most popular by far is new construction, which is for just new commercial and residential buildings, which is the most general, and that's why it's the most popular. And then there's a few different credits in data centers, in warehouses, in schools, because all these different new buildings, while they are new and they fit in this category, have a few different requirements that don't, like, not everything that applies to a warehouse applies to a healthcare facility, or it shouldn't. And that is why we have these 8 market adaptations within B, D, and C. And we go into this in detail as a part of the course as well. And I briefly mentioned the other ones, but pretty much there's 5 of them. One's operations and maintenance for existing building retrofits. We have another one for interior design and construction, which is for tenants to actually fit out their space inside. Then there's one for homes. And our last one is for neighborhood development, where an entire community is certified to a LEED standard. In BC, there's Dockside Green, which was like one of the first one, or the first one ever. In Toronto, we just got one called the West Donlands Project. New York has 5 LEED neighborhoods. One of them is called the Hudson Yards Project, but I'm sure you've seen pictures of. It's a huge development in the heart of Manhattan. And so each of those rating systems have different requirements that pertain to that type of building and if it's new or being renovated. And so we really try to specialize instead of having one big rating system for the building type, which is something that LEED has done a good job at adapting to over the years. So I mentioned prerequisites before. All the categories have mandatory minimums. And the reason being, in Toronto or Canada, water's not scarce yet. And if I'm building a building, I might say, water's cheap. I'm going to focus on the energy savings. You cannot do that. No. LEED is a whole building rating system. It's not just an energy system, a water rating system. And that's why the prerequisites exist. They say, whoa, before you even choose what you want, you're going to have to be 20% more water efficient, 5% more energy efficient, bring in this much fresh air. And once you've set those prerequisites and met them, you've established this kind of minimum level of sustainability throughout all parts of the building. And then LEED says, okay. And I say, okay, I did it. I'm 20% more water efficient. I get why I did it, but now I'm going to focus on what I actually care about. And that's the credits. And I mentioned how each owner, each team selects them based on how many points, how much it costs, how important it is. And the intent of the credits is actually probably the biggest part of the Green Associate class, a really good grasp of why are we doing this credit? How does it help support the environment, economy, and/or society? Why are we doing it? And also understanding all these different strategies and ways that teams can get to those LEED requirements. So now I'm going to take like a few seconds on each category. And I'm just going to really briefly tell you, which is a very big challenge because this is the entire course. going through all of our categories. The integrative design process is a very unique one. It's a point all by itself. It's like a starter point because traditionally, design teams like to work isolated. They say, hey, this is my job. I'm getting paid for it. I'm going to do it as well as I can on my own. We do not want that. We want collaboration. For example, if I make my wall very highly insulated, well, now the HVAC for the heating, ventilation, air conditioning system may not have to make the HVAC design as efficient as they were originally planning to. So just by simple collaboration and being on the same page, there's a lot of cost and energy saving measures that can be achieved. So working together from an early part of the design process is a huge part of sustainable design and LEED. Our next is a big one, location and transportation. And we go through what these boxes mean. It's kind of my way that I summarize the credits and how much points they're worth. And this one, there's two parts to it. One is the location of the project. Are you building on sensitive land? Are you building in the middle of nowhere or in the middle of a dense area where you're connected to people, amenities, transportation systems? And we look at 4 different credits to discourage people from driving alone in a big gas guzzler to our building by encouraging public transit, by locating close to it, biking, carpooling, alternative green vehicles, and that's location and transportation. Sustainable sites more so focuses on what do you do to the site itself? Do you protect it, restore it, make things worse? And so here we have a prerequisite that tells us to control our pollution during construction. Then we have credits worth points for increasing vegetation on the site and open space, reducing the heat island effect by using less hardscapes, dark asphalt surfaces as an example, reducing rainwater runoff from our site and maybe even collecting it and using it later on, as well as reducing light pollution. Water efficiency is our next one. And this is a lot simpler to manage, but pretty much there are 3 prerequisites which each have a corresponding credit. The first one we look at is outdoor water use reduction. And the entire category, the intent is the same. Use less potable water in and around the buildings. Potable water is just water we've treated that we can drink. So don't waste it in our toilets for irrigation. Use it and save it for what we need it for. And so we have a prerequisite and a credit for reducing outdoor water usage, maybe using drip irrigation or rainwater recycled. Indoor water use, we're looking at low flow faucets, dual flush toilets, even composting toilets is an interesting strategy that I've seen work before. And then we have a prerequisite for building level water metering to early detect leaks and save things before they get out of hand. And then we go to the biggest category of energy and atmosphere. And we see Canada, where I'm at right now, we're #1, and these are some old numbers, but we're the best. We use the most energy per person in the world, so we're the worst, don't worry. The US is closely behind us. It's crazy to see this gap. And yes, it's closing slowly, but why are we so far ahead or behind everybody else? It makes sense, to be honest. There's a ton of energy resources here, and relative, it might not feel when you get your electricity bill, but relatively, our energy prices are low in Canada. It also gets really cold here and super hot here. And most people, thankfully, have access to energy sources. And so those 3 things combined for a lot of resources available, making energy low cost and extreme levels of demand by having cold winters and hot summers and everyone with access equals we're not afraid to use it. And we use a lot of energy to meet our demands. But how you should look at this, and I look at this chart every day as inspiration. It's never going to be easier to do better than it is today. We're never going to be worse than it is right now. So let's get started, because that gap being so wide is only going to make it easier for us. Oh, here's a big PV area I worked on a long time ago before I started traveling and teaching, and now I look like this. Thank you very much. Energy and atmosphere is the one we just mentioned. And so this category talks about commissioning, having a third-party person that has had experience with often these very expensive and unique and high efficient building systems from HVAC to lighting actually come there and just oversee and ensure that these expensive high efficiency systems are actually going to work like we're paying them to work. Then we're going to talk a lot about energy modeling. This is a huge part of LEED and a huge part of industry today. More and more cities like Toronto, they're mandating an energy model. Vancouver too, if you want a building permit for a larger structure, I think 10,000 square feet in Toronto. And so the idea of trying to model a building, actually, I'll show you an example of it in a second. So we'll hold that thought. We also have energy metering, and we have refrigerant management to try to reduce the amount of chlorofluorocarbons and save our ozone layer. And then we also encourage on-site renewable energy generation and off-site renewable energy generation. And this is just an example of a model I did a really long time ago now, holy smokes. This is a building in Toronto. And essentially what you do is you build the model inside of software. And there's a lot of softwares out there. There's eQuest, IES, EE4. There's so many different ones and they all do the same thing. How are we gonna know what different design strategies will affect the overall energy usage of the building without having to build it first and just see? Energy models are a way to do it. We build the simulation of our different designs and we compare it to a baseline to see how much better we are than it. And this is a huge industry now as well. It's like on its own, it's separate from LEED as well, because not all LEED buildings need it. Not all buildings need an energy need LEED, but soon enough they will require an energy model, and that's why this is such a big industry now. And this is one that I did in eQuest years ago, as I mentioned. And you can see how much emphasis LEED puts on energy efficiency, up to 19 points in this one credit. You only needed 40 for certified. This is where we're going to save the most money, reduce the most greenhouse gas emissions, which is why it's so heavily rewarded here. We look at materials and resources, focused on where does our demolition debris go? What kind of manufacturing facilities are our products getting made in? What kind of wood are we using? Was it sustainably sourced? And that's materials and resources. And this one has been talked a lot about since the start of the pandemic: indoor environmental quality, having a lot more fresh air, which is what LEED has always really harped on, getting more fresh air into our building and having less chemicals inside it as well, from things like VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds in paints, and adhesives and other toxins. In this category, we also look at how much lighting controls do we have? How much control over how hot or cool we are inside? How much daylight do we have? How many views can we connect to the outside? How are the acoustics? Am I listening to everybody yell, or can I hear myself think? And that's indoor environmental quality. And here we just see an example of our prerequisite that has been talked about a lot, of following something called ASHRAE, which is a very important standard and a society who puts out a lot of standards that LEED piggybacks off of. As I mentioned, LEED does not like reinventing the wheel. They like to incorporate proven strategies into this overarching building rating system called LEED. This is just an example of where we show our thermostats and some of the documentation required when we submit. And our last 10 points are these kind of bonus categories where we have an option for innovative performance, where if you're doing something on your building that you think is good for the environment, economy, and or society, you can create your own credit. Simple as that. If it's not in the current LEED rating system, you can often create your own credit for an extra point. Exemplary performance for doing more than a credit asks, like being 55% more energy efficient. And then we have testing a pilot credit out, or finally a LEED AP. So little old me, I'm worth the points if I'm working on that LEED project. And usually there's a LEED consultant if the project's going for LEED as well, and they're the LEED AP. And then the last 4 points are a little bit newer, trying to focus on the fact that in Toronto, a building's needs is not the exact same as in Vancouver, as in LA. You know, in LA, what happens is the local Green Building Council chapter votes, and they say, what are the 6 most important credits for us based on our geographic location? And you guessed it, water. So each of those water credits got an extra point tacked onto it. So if we're registering a project in LA and we're looking at it, we're like, oh, we can get an extra point just for doing that water credit that I was probably going to do anyway. Well, now we're even more likely to pursue it. And you can always find the list of your 6 regional priority credits on that little link there. And yeah, that's about it for my presentation today. Obviously, the LEED Green Associate is a wonderful way to open the door to a lot of industries you probably didn't know existed. And I would be thrilled if you would join me on Ashton's course. And I think I'm going to answer a few questions if there's any right now. And I am happy to answer any questions from you. And you can either contact me or any of the Ashton crew to do so.
Yeah, I definitely have some questions I want to ask, but I think Maggie has something she wants to add first, or I can add if you like.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Leslie. Yes, to those students who registered for the course, they will get a coupon code that where they can avail a discount when they purchase the course materials for this course. So this is something that the Ashton students will get benefit from taking the course. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Maggie. And I don't know, are you still there? Well, there you are. I was like, we lost you, Lorne.
I'm back.
Perfect. So yeah, I want to ask you a few questions. That was an amazing presentation. I feel inspired to do LEED, even though I'm in communications. What am I going to do with it? But you never know, I guess.
Communicate sustainably. There you go.
Sure. Less breathing out, I guess.
No.
So you've done an amazing job showing what your teaching style would be, very passionate, engaging, and it's great. I love it. What would you bring differently to an online classroom? Is there like group discussion that you like to have, quizzes? What happens there?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So I do like to keep people engaged as much as I can. So I really encourage people to show me their camera just so I can see your reaction when you don't get anything. So I have my second screen with everybody's face on it, which is nice. And I think really having me take up almost half your screen and physically it feels like I'm and be as loud as I am. It really feels like we're back in the classroom together, and it keeps you engaged. And so depending on the mood of the class on the day, I don't often send people into breakout rooms, but there is often a lot of discussion. And so how that usually occurs is through our chat. So through the chat feature, I always keep an eye on the chat on my second screen. And if there's any questions, I just pause at a good time. And then often those questions spark a discussion. And so I really kind of let the class decide what we want to focus on. And that's something unique about how I teach.
Awesome. So you saw all my reactions to the presentation then. Good to know.
I did.
Know.
I did. You were the only one with a camera on, Lindsay, so I got lucky.
And I did have a few more questions that came up during the presentation, but then you answered them. One was talking about your favorite building, but if you want to, that inspires you. If you want to say them again so people can write them down and look them up though.
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. So for a really interesting LEED building, the Nashville Convention Center is a really cool one. And those two that really push the envelope that are just more interesting. One was the Kendada Center, that's Kendada, Kendada in Atlanta, and the Bullitt Center in Seattle. But there's this awesome website called the Green Building Information Gateway, gbig.org, and that is a repository of almost every green building on the planet and gives you a little bit or a lot of information about each one of them. So I get lost on that website all the time, and I encourage you to do so too.
Awesome. That sounds like some great resources to look at. What are your expectations for students who enroll in the course, and how many hours outside of class should they be, studying, prepping?
Very good question. So during the class, we're going to do more understanding. So my goal for everybody after our Friday sessions is to have a good grasp of whatever category or topic we covered. Outside of class, there's really just two main resources that I need everybody to use to prepare, and that is my textbook. So I've written a textbook that's really concise and focused on what is actually going to be on the exam. That's number one, and number two are my 4 practice exams, and that's kind of my best tool. They are very realistic. They're a little more challenging than the real exam, which I don't feel bad for. I don't feel bad for making, because that's how I keep that passing rate so high. And so yeah, everybody's different, but what I do instead is I kind of give targets. I say, number one, you got to come to the webinars. Number two, you're going to read the textbook to reaffirm what you learned in the webinars. Make sure you have a good grasp, ask any questions about it. And then step 3 are my 4 practice exams, which you do until you get about 85% on them. And that's kind of my green light to say, hey, you're ready to go. You can book it, take it, and pass it. And I also wanted to mention that the exam is now available online as well. So it's super convenient. It's offered 7 days a week, like 24 hours a day. You book it a week or 2 in advance when you know you're going to want to take the actual exam. So the course is very flexible because you can often review it on your own time, and you'll have access to those practice exams through my portal. And then the exam you can take whenever you're ready as well.
Do you know, does the exam change every few years? Is it pretty consistent with the questions it asks, or how does that work?
Good question, good question. So the major changes come when the version of LEED changes. So, you know, right now we're on version 4, which really upped the bar from version 3 back in 2014-15. And that was officially released, you know, only five years ago. And so they've been wanting to make some smaller changes to it. And that's called version 4.1, but it's been pushed back a lot due to COVID and some other items. So right now, the exam will be based on this version 4 for at least 1 more year, and could be longer. So right now, I do encourage people to kind of knock this thing out in the next 11 months while we know what the exam is based on and like kind of proving it. Good question.
Perfect. And if you take the exam and happen to not pass, is there a waiting period in between taking the next one or taking it again?
It's a good question. I'll preface it by saying, don't take the exam until you hit my targets, because that you'll pass for sure. But,
Awesome.
but crazy things happen. People have bad days. There's technical errors. Life is crazy. You can take the exam and schedule it right next day, but you do have to pay for the exam again, which is why we want to pass it the first time. But yeah, there is no delay. I think you can only take it 3 times in like the span of a year, but
Okay, that makes sense. Another question I had during it was, is this just for commercial buildings, or is it also for residential? And then you slowly, it got talked about a little bit, but do you think that's becoming more popular? So it seems like a lot of money to put in as a homeowner to do LEED certified residential home.
yeah, so LEED has kind of found it's the right market as being larger buildings. Single family homes, this is just my opinion, there is LEED for homes, but even LEED for homes, it can be applied to 3 to 8 story residential multi-unit buildings. Like, it's not just for single family homes. While you can get a home certified, we're still seeing LEED primarily be used for larger buildings.
Perfect. That makes perfect sense. You showed a model that you created to show the energy efficiency. So for people that do the AP exam and then want to maybe become a consultant, what other education do you think they need to do that? Because I know some of those softwares can be kind of tricky to use. So is there anything you recommend or advice for that?
Absolutely. So energy modeling is a tricky one as an example, because like LEED is an easy to train. Like, here's what you need to do, here's how to do it. For energy modeling, it's really a lot of learning by doing, like most softwares are. So for anybody that wants to kind of fine tune their skills, I show you a lot of really good free resources online that you can kind of learn and practice on your own to get a little more fluency in that software. But as I said, the best part about LEED is you really aren't pigeonholed by what your background is or what you studied prior. If you show you have this knowledge in LEED, it will definitely help right off the bat. Good question.
I would love to know what other, because I can really just, like you've mentioned, lead consulting and doing stuff like that. I'm just curious of what other, if there's any like specific job titles that
Yeah,
uses lead specifically.
sure, absolutely. So that's the most direct way to use this thing is as a lead consultant. But what you see in pretty much every mechanical, electrical, plumbing, engineering firm, civil engineering firm, architecture firm, construction firm, is there's always a lead kind of group or a lead person for smaller companies. And so, those titles often are like lead coordinator, but then more general ones like sustainability consulting firms or companies doing sustainability ratings, like Sustainalytics is a big company in Canada and the globe. And whilst those titles, I feel like people make up these titles every day. When I look on online job boards, they're nuts. So it makes it a little more challenging because every job has sustainability somewhere in their description. So it makes it a little harder to find those little targeted ones, but some of those examples as a lead coordinator at a design or construction firm or as a sustainability consultant, whether it's working on making buildings more sustainable or just a company in general more sustainable and their supply chains, are some of the job titles and the keywords that I look out for that LEED helps with.
Perfect. I know a lot of the questions I'm asking are not on the list I shared with you, so thank you for answering the ones I'm throwing at you.
I actually didn't look at the list.
Oh, perfect. They're there. They're there then. So
Perfect.
what do you love most about your job and the industry, and how has it changed over the past decade?
So it's just grown. That's the
Yeah.
main difference. I don't have to, I'm finding myself having to not introduce LEED as a concept and kind of go into the details of what it asks rather than explaining why it exists, which is really helpful to have somebody already understand why it exists. So that's the big change in terms of like the public and how they see LEED and how they see sustainability. For me, I think I found what I was supposed to do, thankfully. I do love teaching, and I'm fortunate enough to find a topic that I'm very personally passionate about and that I studied as well. So the biggest reward for me is having somebody come into the class from a very different background, like communications, and handling it just as well as any engineer or architect in the class. And so kind of being able to break these concepts down and explain it in layman's terms that you really don't need a technical background, and seeing that success and seeing non-technical people enter technical fields is a real big reward for me.
Amazing. That's awesome. Lily, do you have any questions that you want to share?
I guess so far, like you cover everything I want to ask. So
Perfect. Then we'll just end with the best ending one of, do you have any final words of advice or thoughts you'd like to share with everyone?
Absolutely. I would say if you are on the fence about this or LEED in general or sustainability in general, it really can't harm you. Whether you use it in the next year to find a new career or you use it in the next 5 years, it's never going to hinder you, and you never know what doors it's going to open. And it's really not that huge of a time commitment or a financial commitment. So I just really encourage people to kind of take the leap because there's not much to lose. And there really is a huge upside that's only going to get larger as we go forward in the industry. So come join us.
Yes, come join us, everyone. Thank you so much, Lauren. That was an amazing presentation. And thanks everyone for joining us as well. And feel free to visit our website, ashtoncollege.ca, or give Maggie a call at 604-891-1256, or send her an email at ceinfo@ashtoncollege.ca. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.